Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn. I'll let you keep that. Good morning and welcome, everybody. Good morning and welcome to our virtual attendees. I certainly want to invite your reactions, questions, comments, worries, sharing, advice on this topic, accountability and court performance. Now, I liked something I saw our colleague Emily Lagrada use yesterday, so I'm going to copy and emulate. How many of you would normally start your Tuesday morning thinking about court performance measurement? If so, stand up. Stand up and join me. Wow. Wow. I'm glad to see we have some believers. You may sit now. I'll introduce this subject by saying I am not a numbers person. I am not. I went through 6 years of undergraduate college because I was wasting a lot of college credits. And 6 years of undergraduate with not a single numbers course, not a single one. I was a language major. Get in the Master of Public Administration program. What is the first course they give me? Numbers. I did not do well. I am not a numbers person, but I am here to tell you, in a living example, it is possible to use court performance measures, to understand them, to be conversant with them, and to enjoy using them. I am here to tell you. So, I will use a lot of terms interchangeably, likely. So let me just run through them. Statistics, metrics, analytics, data. I'm missing a few, I know. I will use them all interchangeably, but I consider all of them part of this big soup of being able to measure court performance and accountability. Our conference theme is preserving the core. It's all about justice. My assertion is that we can use court performance measures to measure justice in a variety of ways and a variety of angles. And that court performance measures, metrics, data should be important to us. It should be important to us internally in the court. It should be important to judges. It should be important to every single person, from the court security folks at the front door to the court interpreters, court reporters, special service providers. Court performance measures should be important to all of us. The content we are reviewing in less than 75 minutes is the subject matter of a 2 or 3 day course. So you could spend a lot of time, and I encourage you to spend a lot of time embracing this topic by looking at the full-blown competency on accountability and court performance. I have a copy that I brought with me. It is some 90 pages long. Now don't be dissuaded. This has good information. The full-blown competency, the curriculum, has narrative content on this topic. It has visuals and examples. It has exercises. It has content that can be taken by those who are going to put together an educational program. Everything that you need is in here. But it also has content for those of us who want to study this independently and individually to understand what is this thing called accountability in court performance. Often some of us call it ACP, accountability in court performance. So if you hear me revert to that, that's what ACP means. Here is a reminder of where accountability and court performance is within the 13 full NACM curricula. There are 13. They are arrayed in 3 different tiers, if you will, starting with the vision tier that has leadership, strategic planning, and court governance. Then there's the principal tier that has some foundational content, public trust and confidence, and the purposes of courts. And then lastly, the practice tier that has the things that are of daily importance in the practice in our courts, like case flow management, workforce management, educational development, ethics, budget, and here is where accountability and court performance lies. It is part of the group of materials that court leaders should know and be able to do on a daily basis. So this is where accountability and court performance falls within the overall core. A quick word about the Core Champion Program. Many of you have been in the other sessions, and Dawn reminded us today. The Core Champion Achievement Program is so that NACM members can learn and get exposed to court content and then get recognition and certification. And the underlying purpose restated here, overall, this material is to strengthen all of us and how we do our jobs and what we need to know and be able to understand about our courts. If you do the Core Champion Program, we want it to serve as an increased way of getting exposure to the content and using the content, because it has been put together for us as NACM members. NACM wants to recognize that, and so the Core Champion Program was devised. And here, if you haven't seen it in prior sessions, you can get recognition and a certificate for attending one or more of these programs. And this outlines the different levels of certification recognition, ranging from the Core Explorer, where you get access and demonstrate that you have attended a session, one session from each module, to completion of all 13 in all areas. How do you participate? You attend a session like this, either in person or for our virtual participants, thanks again, you attend it remotely, or you can even watch it after the fact when it's posted on the NACM website. Then you complete what's known as a structured response test, where you answer a few questions about what you learned and your insights from hearing and learning about the content. That's what the Core Champion Program is all about. End result, we want you to be positioned to talk more about your application of the content, maybe even to write an article in one of the NACM publications. I'd certainly welcome an article, which can be very short in nature, in the Court Express. And you get a certificate, which really can be used for you to demonstrate back in the workplace that I have been exposed to this content, that I appreciate it's important, and that I have some takeaways that I can use back in my courts. This then is the Core Champion Program. I want to start our time together by kind of a quick activity. I'm going to take this two directions. The first part of it is I'm going to say 3 words or phrases. And when I say them, I want you to jot or remember what's your first reaction to those words or phrases. You might want to jot them down. 3 things I'm going to say, and then I want your reactions on your first reaction to those words, word, or phrases. Are we ready? Okay, the first one is court statistics. Jot to yourself. What's your first reaction? Court statistics. The next one, accountability. Accountability. And the last one, annual data report. Annual data report. Okay, so let me ask for some volunteers. If you would just call out, I will repeat. When I say court statistics, or Michael's got our mic, wait for the mic, Court statistics.
Incomplete.
Oh, no, never. Anybody else have incomplete? Okay. Other reactions when I say court statistics. What?
Data.
Data. What else?
I was going to say decision-making.
Decision-making. Ooh, bravo. Come up here and teach this with me. What else?
Performance.
Performance. Good. I can tell I'm preaching to the choir here. Good. Okay, the next one was accountability. What was the first thing that occurred to you? Mike, bring the mic over here. Mike, bring the mic.
Transparency.
Transparency. Good. Accountability. Who else had a reaction? Yes, over here.
Public trust and confidence.
Good. Pass it to Angie.
Necessary.
Ooh, nice. Public trust and confidence, necessary. Who else had one on accountability? All right. Was there another one?
Fairness.
Fairness. Very good. You are believers. I'm grateful for that. Okay, the last one was annual data report. What was your first reaction to that? Annual data report.
Frustration.
Yes. Frustration.
Reflection.
Reflection. Whoa, say some more about that. Give her back to Mike. Annual data report, and your reaction was reflection. Say some more.
So how we did in the past year, reflecting on what was good, what was bad, what we can learn from it.
Reflecting on what we've accomplished, maybe what was good, what was bad. Wonderful. Did I miss anyone else? Reaction to this? All right. Now, here's my second way of taking this use of words. When I say court performance measurement, what's the first thing you think of? Court performance measurement. Standard. Good. What else? Accountability. Perfect. Yes. Ugh. Yeah, that's the one I was looking for. Ugh. Oh no. We have to collect all this stuff. We have to somehow compile it into a report. We have to put it together, and then what happens? It might sit on a shelf. And some people might say, thank goodness we have that finished. Who else had a hand up? Yes.
Education. I think it's good for educating others about the work that we do and why, what is important, what we value.
Yes. Good for education and informing others about what we do. Strategy sessions.
Focusing our work and our efforts in the correct place.
Excellent. It can inform us about where we need to plan our strategies, where we need to focus our efforts. Good answers. All right. Thanks, everybody, for thinking about words. You know, in the business world, there's measurement going on all the time. In the business world, the leaders are focused on quantity, quality, effort, how much it cost, how well did we deliver, how much change did we produce, was it worth our monetary investment, how much change was the outcome. Well, courts have not always believed in that. Look at this quote. This comes directly out of the narrative from the core. Being a good manager means being able to monitor performance, to identify what's working well, and what is not. Judiciary relies on this aspect of court management. It goes on to say, it helps us ensure optimum court performance. And ensuring accountability, measuring performance, and applying performance measures to court practices, they are not new concepts. Not anymore. My premise in this presentation, and because of my belief in this, is that performance measures are important. They can be mammoth, they can be small. Metrics help us support accountability for every part of our operation, top to bottom, judges, non-judges. There are indeed challenges and indeed risks, but making performance measurement can be a reality. It is possible. I'm not going to make you calculate numbers or look at percentages, because remember, numbers are not my thing, and I am not necessarily a numbers person. Aspects of this do need further study. And an early tip on this is if you're not a numbers person like I'm not, surround yourself with someone who is skilled. Get them on your team. Tap into someone who has that knowledge, skill, and ability. That's what we did in the court that I worked in. You know, we've heard the term dashboard, right? We've heard the term dashboard. Some of you know that I drive race cars for a hobby. So I've got some race car dashboards up here. And in race cars, the dashboards are used for what? What do the race drivers use them for? Just call it out. Data, yeah. Speed, how fast am I going? How's my fuel level? On some of these, the one on the bottom right is pretty much a Formula One, which I do follow, a Formula One dashboard. There are probably, I don't know, 300 things this little dashboard is telling the driver, in addition to the acceleration and braking tools, in addition to a special lever that folds up a spoiler in the back of the car. We in courts need to think and use dashboards. So I thought I'd weave in the car racing analogy. This is one of my favorite cartoons, and this is all about Ginger. What we say to dogs. Okay, Ginger, I've had it. Stay out of the garbage. Ginger, stay out of the garbage or else. Now here's what Ginger hears. Blah, 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 Ginger. Blah, 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 Ginger. When we use court performance measures, we need to remember this caution. We need to figure out the meaning, the understandability, and the explainability of it, so we aren't going blah, 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 Ginger, blah, 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 Ginger. One of the cautions about using court performance measures. So I want you to think for a moment about your own court. Do your courts use court performance measures? If so, call out what you're measuring. Michael, we're going to need the mic. What performance measures are you using? Time standards? Out-of-home placement for children. Pardon? Out-of-home placement. Okay, so service delivery, sort of. Who else? What are you measuring? Over here? Workload. Workload of who or what? Judges' workload. Oh, you risk taker. Good. Up here. What are you currently measuring?
Recidivism and specialty dockets.
Recidivism, specialty dockets, good one. What else?
Age of pending cases.
Age of pending cases, good. Dawn, do we have virtual?
Tristan online says time in process.
Time in process, good one. Age of open cases in the system, good one. Up here, yes, please.
We measure remote work performance.
Remote work performance, yes. Wouldn't have done that in the olden days, would we? Remote work performance. How is this data used? I'm kind of gleaning from some of these. It's to know how well things are going. How are you using this data? Yes. Grant reporting, yes. That's a biggie. I usually say it later, but I'll say it now. It is very common when we are putting together and packaging a grant that we incorporate how we're going to measure. That's very common. We should be doing that on everything in the court all the time. I have a bias, you can tell. Yes, in the back.
We're looking at the number of people sent to prison versus the number of people deferred from going to prison. So.
Number of people sent to prison, number of people deferred from prison, yes.
Backlog.
Backlog, good, good, good. So, okay, another one over here.
We collect that data for all sorts of things, anything that they said, but we also collect it for our city council members.
Yes.
They request it.
Collecting it for all these things, and especially for city council members, the funding authority, the other part of the government. Yeah. Anybody else that I missed? Anything else remote? Okay. So collecting court performance measures would be easy if not for fill in the blank. It would be easy if not for fill in that blank. What makes it so challenging? Yes, Dawn.
Sometimes it determines judgeships, so there's a secrecy.
It might determine judgeships, so there are some stakes in the game that can be risky. Yes.
Entry errors in the clerk's office?
Entry errors in the clerk's office. Yes. Yes. Some more over here, Michael.
Sometimes they just don't have the dashboards or the reports built for us for the data that we really want.
Using court performance measures would be easy if not for sometimes we don't have the way to collect it. Yes.
For weighted caseload, the weights aren't up to date. They're kind of a little archaic.
So outdated structure and standards and the system itself, yes.
Different definitions of data.
Different definitions of data, yes. So you can see there are a number of things that are going to impact our success or not on the use of court performance measures and how we're going to use it and who it might impact and who might be worried about what's in the data. In this slide, I'm going to go through maybe 3 tiers to explain what is accountability in court performance. Starting at the left-hand side, to me, it means that we as court leaders, and I consider all of us court leaders regardless of our title, it means that we make measuring a priority. It is important to do that. Based on your responses so far and your comments, many of your courts have already demonstrated measuring is important. It means that we use performance goals or targets or standards against which we assess ourselves. And it means somehow we have come up with a way to measure, to record the data. It can be high-tech, mid-tech, low-tech. It can be system generated. It can be manually generated. So accountability in court performance means we have stated this is important, we have found a way to do it, we have found a way to capture data. Moving to the middle column, it means we have actually put actions and protocols in place to compile and tabulate the data. This is where, if we may not be strong on this topic, we get others to help us, and we get them on our team to work on the data. It means that we exert management and leadership skills over this process. When I teach case flow management, I say, and the same thing applies here, case flow management, measuring court performance, should be something we do all day, every day, not something we pull out once a month and think about, not something we pull out once a year when it's time to compile that annual report. Measuring court performance should be visible and present all the time. And while I'm thinking of it, there is a lot of crossover between this course and the course on case flow and workflow management. A lot of crossover, because a huge source of what we might measure under accountability and court performance is what? The workload, the caseload, right? Also here, it means that we somehow have, get, and tap into analytical skills, and even more importantly, communication skills. Remember the blah, blah, blah Ginger example. We need to hone in and finesse our communication skills when we're talking about statistics. Lastly, looking at the right-hand column, we have found a way to actively use the data for evaluating performance for demonstrating accountability, for making sure our operations have transparency, and making decisions. There are multiple aspects of the practice of accountability and court performance. And the bottom line is, we as leaders should make it a priority, and it should be embedded in what we do. Why should we measure? It really does let us demonstrate that we consider public trust and confidence important. And because it's important, we capture and measure and talk about the work we do. It helps us be accountable for operations, to evaluate how productive we are, make decisions. You already mentioned using data for getting judge positions. You might use data for getting other resources. I'll interject here. My own personal bias is we should not use court performance measures just to get resources. If that is our primary goal, we should think twice. That's my bias. We should use accountability and court performance to demonstrate trust. We're focused on outcomes. We want to be transparent. If we get the added side benefit of getting trust in our operation to get more resources, that's wonderful. Also, we might measure, and you've already mentioned, for grant programs or specialty programs, or maybe there's a push to measure results, managing for results, measuring for results. We can use accountability and court performance to identify where there's inefficiencies. We can use data and statistics to validate assumptions. We can use it as support for policy decisions. Ultimately, it makes us practice transparency in our operation. Again, if there's a benefit of getting resources, that's great. But my bias is that should not be our #1 goal. That said, if you're creating a new program and you need to get resources, like creating a grant or a specialty program, yes, you're going to be focused on what resources do we need to make it operate. Are there other reasons that you might think of that are not on this slide? Anything else that should be added to this for the next time I present this? Does anyone have anything to add? Why else? Why measure? What else might go on here? Up here, Michael.
Well, there's public trust and confidence, but I think that when you have measures, you can have trust and confidence yourself as a judge or court managers. So you feel like you're going the right way. I love that. There's our own internal trust and confidence, and I'll translate that to knowing what we're doing. Knowing how all the parts and pieces are functioning right now, today, and maybe in looking back. Yes, another comment.
Well, and kind of moving away from some of the more traditional thoughts in relationship to court performance measurements, in terms of impact on individuals. I mean, even the CCJ-COSCA work on mental health in the court system, that report that came out recently talked about moving towards a person-centered case management system. And as you move towards that, some of the performance measures are about the case management, not the impact. So the transition of some of those elements that we've kind of reserved for the specialty courts into the mainstream in terms of why we are measuring things in terms of impact on individuals, I think would be something that's going to start making its way more readily into the mainstream rather than relegated just to the specialty courts. Very good comment. If you have not looked at the material on courts' response to mental, I'm going to botch the title, courts' response to litigants with mental health needs, it reaffirms some practices in program delivery, program information, services, and they are intertwined with measuring court performance. Indeed, if you've not looked at the material, and that's developing right now all around us. Anyone else, anything else that's not up here? Why should we measure? Yes,
please.
I think courts are often reactive when media requests come in. We're reacting to something that's happened within our city or our community. And I think, we need to probably be better at, educating the community about what courts do. It's tricky, but we've done some things. We had our judges go out into the community before COVID and did some listening sessions, which was wonderful. But it's, we need to be, I don't know if it's called education, but letting the community know what the court does. I don't think they know. A lot of people don't know. They see what they see on TV. And so, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Wonderful comment. It helps us be proactive, education-focused, information-focused, and not just reacting to some crisis that pops up. Thank you. Yes.
We recently shared time to disposition, clearance rate, and age of pending cases with our Law Justice Council, which includes county counselors, and they just really appreciated the transparency of showing the data, whatever it looked like, and explaining it in a way that they could understand how it helps us manage our business.
Very good. Yes.
One of the things that I think it's important to use for is to set and adjust standards and expectations, which ties into what people perceive as being accountable. We've had decades now with time standards, and yet nationally we generally don't do a great job in performing to them. So it leads to questions of, are the standards right or not? How reasonable are they? So maybe we need to re-examine them with some of the data that we've been gathering for decades and not necessarily performing well against.
Great example. And for those who attended the session yesterday on what's going on with civil case filings, there are things percolating that are perplexing and we don't yet have answers to. But it's still valuable to have court performance data so that we can be at least a little bit ahead of the curve. Comment over here.
It kind of speaks to what he just talked about. I think often we, throughout the years as we've become more electronic, as we've added layers, we have data quality, we have image quality, we have all of these things, weighted caseload, staffing weighted caseload, I don't believe has accounted for it. And I think one of the things we see, or that I think is a problem, is we're measuring how much time staff or we are doing things in, not the amount of time we should be doing things in.
Good one.
Because we are constantly cramming more and more on them, and they're not taking the appropriate amount of time necessary in the courtroom or with the work on our desks. We're just having to produce more and more, and maybe the quality or what should be being done isn't being done because of meeting measurements that aren't reasonable anymore.
Great comments. Thank you over here. And your comments remind us we know of some blemishes and some faults and some obvious gaps in our work and how we measure it. And we know how we maybe are not stacking up against those. That's okay. Part of our leadership skills should be find a way to talk about it. Don't stop measuring. Find a way to talk about it. Comment over here.
Yes. So as I've been listening, I've been thinking about within a state, but I also think it's important to think about why we measure to compare across states and to share and to see what's happening on a national level. So I also think we need to put that on the list in terms of how we're using that data, why we're collecting it. It's so helpful for people who are outside the courts who are doing research to share, compare, and look at that data. So that's another component externally.
Indeed. Thanks for bringing that up. You know, that's a scary proposition for some of our courts. You're going to compare us to another court. You're going to compare us against the national benchmark. Again, one of my biases is if we are not prepared to do that, it will be done to us. We might as well be ready and be knowledgeable about what our performance measures show. Comment.
Yes, I've been thinking from this class, or this, I've been thinking about how certain measurements can lead to certain incentives that can then lead to certain behaviors. And, so I think about like clearance rates and the backlog and all of these other things that, while it's really important, and I know that those that are involved in those cases want their day in court, totally get it. But when we start making decisions to speed up paper in, paper out, and we start losing the humility and the fairness that comes to having your full day in court because we're trying to hit these measures that may no longer be reasonable in post-pandemic world. So it's balancing, and obviously we know that because we are measuring it and we can start seeing those outcomes and start reacting to it. But I think we need to be open to the possibility that some of these metrics are leading to behaviors and outcomes that are unintended.
Yeah, do we want to just chunk up more volume of what we produced, or do we want to think about the quality? That should be on this list too. Thank you for offering those additions. So court performance measures can be used obviously for overseeing case flow management, overall operations, what's going on with the workforce, maybe even distribution of tasks, obviously budget and fiscal management. It can provide us objective support for policy decisions, not anecdotal, not storytelling. How many of you have sat in a meeting where there's a decision pending and someone lobs a far out example on the table and everybody then responds as if that's fact, but it was an anecdote, it was a story about an outlier case. We can use measures to overcome that. It's a challenge, though. We need to get believers with us. There is a huge crossover between using performance measures, as I've already said, with case flow, staff assignment, maybe even judicial distribution. So just keep that in mind. Here, another slide that mentions use for effectiveness, operations, diagnosing things, presenting information, just a broad display of ways we can use court performance measures. Ultimately, moving our management and leadership of the organization from making decisions based off single instances or anecdotes and grounding it in the use of metrics and data and facts. A quick review of how we came to be where we are now. Way back in the 70s, the American Bar Association published time standards. They have since been revised. COSCA developed time standards. Then came the Trial Court Performance Standards, or TCPS to some. Then I remember there was heavy work on, let's have some statistical definitions in standard practices. Court tools came about. Then the international part of courts developed the international framework for court excellence, the high performance court framework. And here we are now with updated model time standards. We've got the principles of judicial administration, and we have the NACM core. All of these things attempt to document and describe excellence in court performance, court leadership. So we have matured and progressed in our thinking. We're not at nirvana yet, but we should still be grasping these concepts and putting them to use. I'm going to quickly go through some examples of court performance measures. Quick show of hands. How many of you have been in a course on court performance measurement before? Raise your hands. All right, you know this stuff. How many of you, by show of hands, have been in a course on case flow and workflow management? Good, okay, you know this. I'm going to quickly review some of these. Many of them are near and dear to me because we actually use them in our court. We practiced them, we believed in them. We're going to talk about the use of performance goals, measuring transaction points, thinking about lines of service and volumes of service, also thinking about taking an inventory of what we do, which is where we might look at, are we setting the right incentives in place for what we're producing? Have we looked out for redundancies and wasting of our time? So let's kick this off by reviewing the performance goals and targets. Here's a screenshot from the model time standards that many states, but not all, have adopted, and it sets out what's intended to be reasonable performance targets. You've already mentioned these may be unreasonable, these may be arbitrary, these may not be achievable, and they may be outdated. Well, in our court leadership skills, we can also set some interim goals in place, and at a minimum, we can take tally of how well we are performing according to these standards. So this is one of the foundational concepts, and ultimately it says, here's the target you should shoot for in terms of movement of cases through your courts. Here's quick mention of the Trial Court Performance Standards, TCPS or CPS. This was the very first groundbreaking attempt to prepare courts to measure their workload, caseload. This was developed starting in 1987 to 1990. Under this protocol, there were 5 performance areas. You see them on the screen. There were 22 standards embedded in this, and there were 68 measures. What's your reaction when you hear 68 measures? Not a lot. Oh my gosh. The beauty of this is it broke the seal on courts' reluctance to measure. Turned out to be too complicated, too difficult. 5 areas, great. 22 standards, great. 68 measures? Way too complicated. Court Tools was the outcome to revise and revamp. And in the Court Tools measures, the whole goal is to make it a little more practical, to have fewer things to focus on, and to have those measures give you a balanced perspective. That phrase is used a lot. Balanced perspective on how you are performing. The Court Tools measures tell you about access, fairness, equality, perceptions. They ultimately cover, as noted on this slide, a court's efficiency, effectiveness, productivity, and procedural satisfaction. They are outcome-based, so that if you use the measures, you have information to tell you what were the outcomes of everything we have invested in this organization. Here is a quick view of the Court Tools. I do not expect you to read the screen, but this is just to display 10 main measures, ranging from public trust and confidence and perceptions about access to the court, to the typical case flow management measures. How old are the cases that are in our system? How long did it take us to move them to closure? What's the clearance rate? I'm missing one. What's the last one? Court Tools aficionados. Clearance rate, time to disposition, age of active pending, and trial date certainty. Ooh, everyone. Continuance rates. So I share this just as a prompt and a reminder about Court Tools. I am a believer. The court I worked in used all 10 Court Tools. Not just once, we used them regularly. There are some challenges and there are some benefits. Let's take a moment to think about the types of measures. 2 main types. Looking at the left-hand side, we've got qualitative measures, things that describe the work, the volume, the outcomes, maybe the characteristics. These can be acquired through questionnaires, through surveys, maybe logs, diaries, observation. So we're talking some low-tech ways here. Question over here. Michael, bring the mic.
I was just hoping you could explain diaries a little bit more.
Diaries. What I mean by that is maybe a logbook or a journal that you might ask an employee or a work unit to record. And that kind of goes along documenting as it goes and recording your observations and experiences. So maybe a better word would be a journal or a log. These statistics can be acquired through that way. Other question? Okay, looking at the right-hand column, there are quantitative measures. These define the work. This is where we might use more pure numbers and data. These too can be acquired through surveys and questionnaires, maybe interviews, maybe observations. I would re-urge the importance of using non-technology ways to get information. If you do not have a wonderful system or process in place, you can still capture data. Take a sampling. Go watch, go sit in a courtroom. How long is it taking for cases? How long does each case take from the minute it's called to the minute the judge moves to the next case? You can still capture information. The importance of observing and sampling. We used a lot of tick marks and scratch marks in our court. We really did. You can capture information that way. So there are also different ways to think about analyzing what you've got. Do you want to look at your performance over time and compare this year to last year, this month to last month? Do you want to look at your data and compare it against the time standards? That might be one use of it. Do you want to use it internally, maybe evaluating one work unit against another? Going back to the earlier comment about thinking nationally, do you want to benchmark with other courts? Believe me, the data is out there to do that. We forget that. If your state is like mine, where the data is in a massive data repository, it is sliced and diced and calculated and aggregated. It is there. You can compare your court with another. How many cases for us? How many for them? What's the age of case for us? What's the age of case for them? What's our budgetary investment? The ability to benchmark is there. This is part of being more astute in our use of court performance measures. Here is a visual that shows 3 different, maybe categories of performance measures, and these are examples. On the left-hand side, you see basic. I'm calling these basic, and these are typically aggregates of how many cases were filed, how many workloads came in, how many we finished, and how many were left. Your courts do these kind of reports all the time, right? This is what I call kind of the basic or the traditional use of court performance measures. Moving to the center of this, we have measures that are perhaps more operational focused for us. What's the age of things that are in our system? How long is it taking for us to move cases? What about our continuance rates? Maybe even how many events are we getting scheduled in time slots or in a week's time or a month's time? As leaders of this enterprise, we benefit if we move over to the right-hand column and go even deeper and peel back for more information. What are the rates? What are the patterns? What are the trends? Where are things getting bogged down? Where do we need to think about adjusting our processes? So kind of 3 tiers of measurement: basic, operational, and then levels that give us a lot more detail for management decisions. You can use the one on the left, but I recommend, to the degree possible, you work for your courts to get into the operational and the management level information. Let me take a breath and field some questions or some reactions. Okay, hearing none. Oh, yes.
I would just say I love the idea of moving to the right, because when I think about improving civil justice and what we can do to make changes, I think about things like how many motions are being filed, not just how long it takes to close the case, how long it takes to get through to the end to justice for people, but also what's happening in the middle. Yes. That I think is also critical to measure. So as we can dive deeper into numbers of motions, types of hearings, all of that is so helpful to understand what's happening throughout the life of the case and for the parties.
We are thus talking about more than just the 10 court tools measures. How many of what and how's it going is what you're referring to. Yes, these are vital. Do I see a hand? Back row, Michael.
We just looked at some pretrial release information, and in relation to a new presiding judge order that we created, we were very surprised, although we only looked at 5 weeks worth of data, which makes me nervous. It doesn't feel like it's enough data to, sort of look to see, should we change our presiding judge order from what it was originally to modify it? Interestingly, overrides, which was one of our options for these cases, were used a very minor number of times, which was I was shocked. And so, but it just makes me nervous looking at only 5 weeks worth of data to make this pretty major change, so.
Your comment prompts me to say, it's okay to be nervous. I know when we produce things, our courts are subject to public distribution, but we still need to be doing this because that's part of being accountable and transparent and knowing what's going on, from how many things are happening to what's the big picture. Comment up front.
My concern is finding the time to have quality management information. It takes time we have the dashboards, and generally, as Neil said earlier, we're so reactive. We're responding to something that's hit the bench. We're responding to a media request. We're responding to whatever the hot topic is in the media. But to sit down and look at the basic and operational data that we have, and then making, determining rates, patterns, trends, delay areas, case flow programs, it's super important, but where do we find the time? It's like we have to calendar that in quarterly just to have a summit or something with our management teams to just sort of discuss that. And that 2-hour summit is the only time that anyone's actually going to think about it.
Oh, wow. Couldn't be more true. It's only when we have the thing in front of us. Oh, okay, I'll pay attention to it now. My own experience is, indeed, you need to program in the time in whatever magnitude you can. We programmed in the time monthly. We were concerned because some of this was risky and we didn't necessarily trust the data, but we programmed in the time to talk about it, to review the report, couple that with the knowledge and the expert statistician or whoever can help you. This is vital to us because this is a leadership function. It really is. I'm a believer because the court I worked in came under attack from the funding agency distrusting us in using resources, distrusting us in thinking we knew our business. They didn't think we knew our business. The chief judge was very quiet, very subtle, did not want to brag about what the court did not want to stand up in front of a group of people and talk about what the court did. The city council was so mad at us, they fired 2 of the judges. Suddenly we're down judge resources. The team that had already programmed in the time to think about court performance measures geared up. That is when we started using all 10 court tools. We pulled the data. Yes, there were errors. We pulled the data. Yes, there were problems. Yes, we had problem performance. But we published it. We compiled it. We briefed the mayor and council. The most crusty person on the city council said, "This is wonderful. I'll look forward to next year's update." This stuff is powerful. It is scary, but we need to find a way to be masters of this if we can. Okay, the high performance court framework tells us that we can use court tools measures to inform us about these things: efficiency, effectiveness, productivity, and procedural satisfaction. Here is how we can do it. Here are some of these measures arrayed in those areas. Here's what you can measure to tell you effectiveness: efficiency, productivity, procedural satisfaction. I would hint that you should think of this chart, go back to your court, and populate as much as you can in these areas. Again, it came from this quadrant, but here's what you can actually do to tell you about these things. Then, when you're talking to your funding agency, your bench bar committee, your community group, your budget department, you can say, here's what we know about our productivity, because we pull it directly from how well we're moving cases along and the age of cases. It's okay if you have blemishes or errors in your data. Own up to it. Point it out. There was a time when we were deeply embroiled in the photo enforcement program that everybody in courts had to mobilize quickly to do, and the court was the center of this mammoth mess. We chose to publish a report once a week to talk about how many cases were filed, how old are the cases, what were the results, how many got dismissed, how many pending, how many were deferred, whatever. Published it every single week. That's part of the be ahead of the curve. That's part of the be ahead of the curve. Here's just another view with the prompt to invite you to think about, where are your courts gathering data? And which of these quadrants can you use your current measures to tell you about efficiency, effectiveness, productivity, and procedural satisfaction? Again, from the High Performance Court Framework, the use of court performance measures is best when used in a problem-solving process. Here's a view of a problem-solving process, titled The Problem-Solving Cycle. Starts out with, where are we now and what's our challenge? We need to evaluate. Let's get some data. Let's consider some options. Let's start some actions. And again, evaluate. Michael, we have a question, back row.
On the last slide, there was employee satisfaction. Can you talk about that a little bit? I think many courts are having challenges with employees, staying. We have lots of new employees, and what does that sort of look like? Our court has not been, we haven't surveyed our staff, but I've been very interested in doing it. They're starting
the staff survey. One of the Court Tools measures invites us to survey staff. How many of your courts have used the Court Employee Satisfaction Survey? Who would be willing to share their experience and give advice to our colleague? Yes, we have a hand over here. Share your words of wisdom on the use of the staff survey.
I don't know if it's words of wisdom, but I have actually, every time I've gone into a new court job, I've started the employee satisfaction. So I have a good baseline for where people are at. It's not uncommon for people to not be in a good place sometimes when you walk in. So it gives you good feedback. I would say that you need to be very transparent with the feedback. The survey is essentially written for you. I do it anonymously through SurveyMonkey, but use the exact questions that are in Core Tools. And then you need to be willing to share. And then if I've seen that an area that maybe is below a 4, then I'll do a little work group with people to just find out, okay, how can we improve on this? What's at the issue? Because it's not always obvious. And you should not assume. Sometimes it's something really simple, as simple as a suggestion box or something like that. But then when you do it, I think I did 8 years in Eugene. You have a great trend, and you can see the improvement, and you can share the year over year or the history of it. as well. It's really a good morale booster. But there is always one or two, no matter where you're at, that are unhappy. Just the way it goes.
Thank you for sharing words of wisdom. So hook up with Cheryl afterwards for more in-depth nuts and bolts.
And I was going to say, even if you're a court of one, which I was before, and now I'm a court of three, you can still do an employee satisfaction survey with yourself to make sure that you're going where you want to go. And like, if you can focus on different areas, like, well, why am I unhappy with this? And then try to figure out a way to go through it. So you don't have to have a huge court or a lot of staff to be able to use that to kind of come up with some outcomes.
And keying off these comments, you can use the survey to go back and correct things that have been identified as wrong. You can use the survey result to populate annual data reports. Employees indicated 85% satisfaction with X. You can use it. The court I worked in had used the court employee satisfaction survey. By the time I left, we had 10 years worth of data. We did it annually. We shortened the number of questions. When we got the survey results, we would look at two things. What are the highest rated results? Let's figure out how to parlay those, talk about them, pat ourselves on the back. And the lowest results. And always, 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 one of the lowest items was not enough communication from the supervisor to the employee. Okay, we need to do a better job of communicating. We would hold an all-staff meeting. We would engage work groups to work on whatever the low-rated item was. There are lots of things you can do with that. In my mind, of the 10 court tools measures, the easiest to use are the clearance rate and the employee satisfaction survey. The easiest. Comment.
I'll just add to that the other thing I really like about the employee satisfaction survey is that it allows you to group questions into categories, like what tools do you have the tools you need to do your job, or and so you can look at it multiple ways. You can look at it by the question, you can look at it in these categories, you can see where you're trending in a particular category. So it kind of helps you analyze a little better what's going on in your work environment.
As I used to say, I had worked in the court for 20 years and no one had ever asked me to fill out a survey. These are wonderful tools we can use. A quick review of some other things that we did. We started counting touch points. Where does the court need to have resources and services available for our users? Touch points. Security screening, phone calls, payment ability, records request, all kinds of things. We counted it. You can count how many people come in your court by walking through the front. What's the walk-through device? Magnetometer? I can never. You can count how many people came in. We were able to tell the mayor and city council, do you know that we have 10,000 people in our court on a monthly basis? Powerful stuff. We could count phone calls. Do you know that the phone call volume for us is higher than the 911 system? You can count. This stuff is available to you now. So this protocol, and this is all in the materials that are in the PowerPoint, in the app, you can count. We did an even lower tech counting of what was the workload each month and comparing month to month. I know you cannot read these details, but we were counting how many documents filed, how many hearings set, how many hearings held, how many records requests, how many financial payments, how many warrants were issued. We use resources to do every one of those things. So this is another example. Here is how our court used the court performance measures. This was embedded in the publicly available city budget documents. Court tools measures, an explanation of each one, a column for actual, a column for estimated this year, a column for projected next year. There is some guesswork to this. The whole idea was to demonstrate we know our operation. We can manage our operation using court-based performance measures. Here is an example of how our court used a couple of things. The traditional annual report that would say, rah, here's what we did this year, here's our outcome, but it embedded wording about the high performance court framework, and it embedded the court tools measures. In each one on the lower left over here, in each one of these areas, there was data about the court tools data measures. We also did a task inventory called the bucket list, where we actually counted what are staff doing, what are the desk assignments, what's the workload distribution, and more importantly, what's the mandate behind what we do. If there's no mandate, should we be doing it? Maybe not. So this, again, the full write-up is in one of the NACM Court Manager articles. Bottom line, if you're going to use court performance measures, figure out what's important to you. Does it matter? Next, can you measure it? Even if you have to use hash marks, can you measure it? And lastly, can you maintain it? If you spend so much time counting measures and they are not used, I suggest you consider the time you spent on capturing them. So matter, measure, and maintain. Make sure you know what's the message, who's the audience, how are we going to use this, how are we going to present it, how are we going to talk about it so we are not saying blah, 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 Ginger. And Ginger might be us. I don't understand this. Ginger might be judges, right? Ginger might be the public who really doesn't understand this. How are we going to do it to make it meaningful? Here is my suggested action planning for you. I want you to keep this slide in mind. Think about how you will link court performance measures to your court mission and vision, because that's another important thing to do. Link your measures to the mission and the vision. How are you going to use the measures to talk about the court performance? Which may mean you need to translate the data into understandable details and information. And how can you use data from court performance measurement every day in your court? Some lessons. Tap into your governance structure. Leverage this from your governance structure. This isn't in isolation. Make sure you have staff with skills to help you if it's not you. There's a whole litany here. Here's another great list that comes from one of our colleagues. Use the right indicators. Automate if you can. Decentralize and centralize. Make the data transparent. This slide captures my entire view. Measure everything coming in. How many of this, how many of that, how many papers, how many phone calls, how many requests, how many financial payments. Measure everything, even if you have no technology to do it. Then measure what you're producing. Events, outcomes, cases concluded, documents issued, customers seen. But again, my little prompt on the bottom, is it important? Can you measure it and can you maintain it? You know, as part of this, we should be continually asking questions. How are we doing? Are we meeting our expected performance goals? So asking the question along with using the right measures is vital. As one of my colleagues says, you need to nail it. Recognize this slide? One of my colleagues, Cyril Miller, uses this a lot. Use as many measures as you can. Nail it. The more measures you have, the more comprehensive picture you will have about court performance, which will enrich your ability to talk about the important work that courts do, to talk about how did we use the resources you gave us. Here's a quick activity I suggest you do as you think about using court performance measures. First, describe or identify the decision you need to make. Do you need to practice with the court employee survey? Okay. How do you feel about it? This is risky. I'm going to have to communicate. What if they don't fill it out? Next, visualize how things will look if it goes well. What's that outcome? Lastly, start defining what you're going to do to use that measure. Just a quick and dirty activity to think about this. I would like to ask for a volunteer or two to share one thing you're going to do as a result of this course. Do I have anyone brave enough to volunteer? Over here, please.
Including the court tools budget in the annual report we're going to do.
Good for you, including the court tools measures in the annual report. Go copy and emulate what we've got in this slide, yes. And remember, avoid the blah, 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 blah ginger. We've got to provide some explanations. Anyone else? One thing you're going to do.
I'm going to go through all of the state and local dashboards and write down everything that we're tracking and talk to the trial court administrator and find out what is relevant to us.
You're going to go evaluate all your dashboards and then identify what's relevant. Maybe you can peel off some things that are not used, that are outdated. Maybe you can amplify things that are not being used as fully as they should. Good. Comment at the back. One thing you're going to do.
Employee survey.
Good for you.
Plus, we have lots of data floating around, but it's not really summarized anywhere, collected, right? And it's very important. And I think we need to do that, and we will make that happen.
Come back and share with us at a future session. Thank you all for participating and thinking about this topic, which is foreign to some of us. Remember, it's part of the overall core competencies. And remember, if you want to get the Champion program, you can get the structured response test. It is in the app. Or you can email core@nacomnet.org and get that document. Easy to do. I can tell by your comments and your hand raising that you already know this. I'll leave you with a closing word of advice. Have your courts have a statistical presence. Have your courts use court performance measures and data. In yesterday's session, one of our colleagues, Alan Carlson, said this, and I quote, "We in courts do a terrible job of telling folks about what courts are doing. We really do. If you can use one or more or many of these court performance measures, you can do a better job of telling people the important story about what courts do and telling us, our judges, our staff, about what courts do." Thanks for your participation. Thank you, virtual participants. Go forth and have your courts have a statistical presence.